It begins with a flame flickering against the walls of a palace in Pella, Macedonia. The year was 356 BCE, and Olympias, the queen of Macedonia, had just given birth to a child who would be remembered, not merely as a king but as a conqueror, destined to etch his name into eternity. On that same night, legend says, the temple of Artemis, at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, was set ablaze. To many, it was an omen, a sign that a force had entered the world, one that would burn across nations like a consuming fire. That child was Alexander. From the very beginning, stories surrounded him like shadows. His mother claimed divine favor, whispering that Alexander was not only the son of King Philip II, but perhaps of Zeus himself. The boy would grow up hearing that he was born of gods and destined for glory, an intoxicating tale that planted within him a hunger for greatness that would never be quenched. Alexander's childhood was one of contradiction. He was raised in luxury, the son of a powerful king, yet his father was a man of war who forged Macedonia into a dominant power. Philip demanded discipline, strength, and courage from his son. It was Philip who bought the great horse Bucephalus, deemed untamable by others, until a young Alexander, barely 13, calmed the beast by turning it toward the sun, so it would not be spooked by its own shadow. When Philip watched his son mount and ride the horse, he is said to have declared, "My boy, you must find a kingdom great enough for your ambition. Macedonia is too small for you." Yet for all his father's sternness, it was his education that molded Alexander into something beyond a warrior. His tutor was none other than Aristotle, the philosopher whose works would shape the foundations of Western thought. Under him, Alexander studied philosophy, politics, medicine, and the natural sciences. Aristotle taught him the love of knowledge and the value of inquiry, instilling in him the belief that conquest was not merely about territory yet, was about the fusion of cultures and the spread of ideas. By his teenage years, Alexander had already shown signs of brilliance. He commanded troops in battle at the age of 16, defeating rebellious tribes and founding a city named Alexandropolis. He was not just the heir to Philip, he was proving himself a warrior prince, a leader who demanded loyalty through charisma and fearlessness. His soldiers quickly learned that Alexander never asked of them what he would not do himself. He fought in the front lines, bled with his men, and led charges that turned the tide of battle. But Alexander's rise to the throne was not destined to be smooth. In 336 BCE, Philip II was assassinated at Aja, stabbed by one of his bodyguards. Some whispered that Olympias had a hand in the plot, ensuring her son's succession. Whatever the truth, the young Alexander, just 20 years old, became king of Macedonia, and with his coronation, the world shifted. The new king inherited his father's dream, the conquest of Persia, the great empire that stretched from Asia Minor to the borders of India. For centuries, Persia had loomed as the enemy of the Greek world, the empire that had once sought to subjugate them. Philip had prepared an invasion, but never lived to see it. Alexander would take that dream, sharpen it with ambition, and carry it to unimaginable heights. The beginning of his campaigns tested his rule. Many Greek city-states sought independence after Philip's death, believing Macedonia would collapse without its king. But Alexander marched swiftly, crushing rebellions with ruthless efficiency. Thebes dared to rise against him, and Alexander annihilated it. He razed the city to the ground, sparing only temples and the house of the poet Pindar. This brutal act sent shockwaves across Greece. Rebellion would be met with obliteration. The message was clear. Alexander was no boy king to be trifled with. By 334 BCE, with Greece firmly under his control, Alexander turned eastward. At the head of some 35,000 men, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor before stepping onto Persian soil. He visited the ancient city of Troy, paying homage to Achilles, whom he idolized. At the tomb of the great hero, Alexander declared that he envied Achilles because Achilles had a Homer to immortalize him. In that moment, Alexander revealed his deepest desire, not only to conquer, but to be remembered forever. The war against Persia began at the Battle of the Granicus River, facing satraps loyal to King Darius III. Alexander led a daring cavalry charge that smashed through enemy lines. His audacity nearly cost him his life, but his men saved him, proving the bond between general and soldier. With victory secured, City after city opened its gates to him. The march of Alexander had begun. At Issus, in 333 BCE, Alexander faced King Darius himself. Vastly outnumbered, the Macedonian army nonetheless broke through the Persian lines with a tactical brilliance that stunned the world. Alexander led a decisive cavalry strike that forced Darius to flee the battlefield, abandoning his family, capturing the Persian king's mother, wife, and children. Alexander treated them with respect, a gesture that contrasted with the brutality of ancient warfare and won him admiration, even among his enemies. From Issus, Alexander turned toward the coast, determined to secure the eastern Mediterranean. Tyre, the great island fortress, resisted him for months. Yet Alexander was relentless. He built a massive causeway across the sea, battering the city until it fell. The siege of Tyre became a testament to his determination. No wall was high enough, no sea wide enough to stop him. In Egypt, the people welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. At the Oracle of Siwa in the Libyan desert, Alexander sought divine confirmation of his destiny. Priests declared him the son of Zeusammon, cementing his belief in his own divinity. In the Nile Delta, founded a new city, Alexandria, jewel of learning and commerce that would endure for centuries as a beacon of knowledge. But it was at Gaugamela in 331 BCE that Alexander achieved his greatest triumph. Facing Darius once again, this time with a massive Persian army drawn from across the empire, Alexander's tactical genius shone. Using feigned retreats and precise cavalry maneuvers, he shattered the Persian lines and sent Darius fleeing once more. With this victory, the Persian Empire, once the mightiest in the world, lay at Alexander's feet. Babylon, Susa, Persepolis all fell before him. In Persepolis, Alexander allowed his men to loot the great palace of Xerxes, a symbolic act of vengeance for Persia's past invasions of Greece. Drunk with victory, he later set fire to the palace, watching the flames consume the heart of Persian power. Whether it was a deliberate political act or a drunken impulse, the burning of Persepolis marked the symbolic end of Persia's glory. Darius pursued relentlessly, was betrayed by his own satraps, and killed. When Alexander found his body, he honored him with a royal burial, declaring himself the rightful king of Asia. He had conquered an empire. But for Alexander, conquest was not enough. He hungered for the edge of the known world. He marched east, pressing into the mountains of modern Afghanistan and the plains of Central Asia. It was here that Alexander faced some of his fiercest resistance. Tribes refused to submit, forcing him into brutal campaigns that tested the endurance of his army. Yet even here he left his mark, founding cities, many of them named Alexandria, that became crossroads of cultures. It was in these lands that Alexander met Roxana, a noblewoman of Bactria, married her, a union that symbolized his vision of blending Greek and Eastern cultures. Later, he would also marry Statera, a daughter of Darius, further uniting his conquests through bloodlines. His policy of fusion was controversial among his Macedonian officers. But Alexander believed himself not just a conqueror of nations, but a unifier of peoples. By 327 BCE, his ambition drove him toward India. Crossing the Hindu Kush, Alexander descended into the Punjab. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, he faced King Paris, who fielded war elephants against the Macedonian phalanx. It was one of Alexander's toughest battles, but through sheer determination and tactical brilliance, he triumphed. Impressed by Porus's courage, Alexander restored him to his throne, gaining a loyal ally. But his men, weary from years of campaigning, balked at the idea of pushing further into India. At the Hyphasis River, they refused to march eastward. For the first time, Alexander was forced to turn back. Though furious, he respected their decision, recognizing that even the greatest conqueror is bound by the limits of human endurance. On the return journey, Alexander's army endured a punishing trek through the Gedrosian desert, where thousands perished from heat and thirst. Yet Alexander shared in their suffering, refusing water unless his men could drink as well. This act bound him to his soldiers, even as exhaustion weighed heavily upon them all. By 323 BCE, Alexander returned to Babylon, the seat of his vast empire stretching from Greece to India. Lands swirled in his mind, new campaigns into Arabia, grand projects of integration, the fusion of East and West into a single world order. He envisioned roads, trade routes, and cities that would bind cultures together under his rule. But fate had other plans. In June 323 BCE, at the age of just 32, Alexander fell ill, perhaps from fever, poison, or exhaustion. For days he lay dying, unable to speak, as his generals anxiously awaited a word of succession. When asked who should rule after him, he is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." With those words, Alexander the Great passed into legend. His empire, vast and unprecedented, did not survive intact. Civil war erupted among his generals, the Diadochi, who carved it into kingdoms of their own. Yet Alexander's legacy endured, not in territory, but in ideas. His vision of cultural fusion gave birth to the Hellenistic Age, where Greek thought, art, and science spread across the known world, mingling with Eastern traditions. In the centuries that followed, his name became a symbol of ambition and conquest. He was remembered not only as a king, but as a force of nature, a man who lived as if the world itself were too small for him. Facts about Alexander the Great. Alexander never lost a battle in his entire career, despite often being outnumbered. He named more than 20 cities after himself, most famously Alexandria in Egypt. His favorite horse, Bucephalus, had its own city named after it following its death. He carried a copy of Homer's Iliad with him on campaigns, keeping it under his pillow. He introduced Persian customs to his court, including bowing before him, scandalizing his Macedonian companions. Alexander once drunkenly killed his close friend Cletus in a quarrel and deeply regretted it. His empire stretched across 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women, blending cultures. Alexander's sudden death has fueled countless theories: fever, poisoning, even assassination. His body was placed in a golden sarcophagus in Alexandria, but its final resting place remains a mystery. Alexander the Great's life was a flame that burned too brightly to last. In just over a decade, he reshaped the world, leaving behind not merely an empire, but a vision, a dream of unity, of cultures mingling, of horizons forever expanding. Though his conquests fractured, his influence never vanished. He lived and died in pursuit of glory, refusing to accept the limits of men. And in that, perhaps, lies the secret of his immortality. Alexander was not simply a conqueror of lands, but a conqueror of time. Remembered across millennia as the man who dreamed beyond the edge of the world,